The envelope was yellowed, sealed with an unfamiliar wax crest, an antlered stag pierced by a single arrow. Caleb Thorne turned it over in his hands, frowning. The handwriting was elegant, old-fashioned, and it bore no return address. Inside, a single sheet read, "Come to Ellenton. The truth dies each year, the night before the festival." There was no signature. Just a postmark, Ellenton, Pennsylvania. Intrigued and sensing a story few journalists would dare chase, Caleb packed his notes, his camera, and boarded the earliest train west. The name Ellenton had surfaced only once in his previous research, a brief mention in an 1893 journal about isolated Appalachian settlements and their unbroken traditions. Beyond that, silence. The journey from Philadelphia to the hills was long, the train tracks thinning into dense forests and steep, fog-choked valleys. By the time he reached the small station where a horse-drawn wagon awaited him, dusk was curling around the ridges like smoke. The driver said nothing on the ride into town. Caleb tried to break the silence twice, once with a greeting, once with a question about the festival. The driver only glanced at him through the cracked mirror, his eyes unreadable, and shook his head. Ellenton appeared like a dream pulled from the wrong century. Gas lamps flickered on every corner, casting warm, wavering halos. Homes lined the cobblestone streets, their porches sagging with the weight of time. The air smelled of dry leaves, burning wood, and something faintly metallic beneath it all. At the heart of town stood a grand courthouse with a steeple topped by a rusted weather vane. Across from it, a wide town square bloomed with strange dried flowers, purples and blacks and deep ochres, and a stage was being built by townsfolk who moved methodically, but with oddly solemn faces. Caleb checked into the boarding house run by Miss Agatha Muir, a sharp-eyed woman who offered him tea but warned, "Don't wander after dark." "The town doesn't take kindly to trespass after sundown." He smiled politely. "Because of the festival?" She didn't answer. Instead, she asked, "You here for the harvest, or the truth?" "The truth," Caleb said. Her hand trembled as she handed him the room key. Later that night, unable to sleep, Caleb stepped onto the porch, notebook in hand. He watched shadows stretch along the alleyways, noticing how every window in town had its curtains drawn tight. The stillness was thick, suffocating. Not even crickets dared speak. That's when he heard it, a soft, melodic hum. Several voices, low and reverent, carried on the wind from the square. He leaned forward, chanting, foreign, maybe Latin, maybe something older. He crept down the steps, pausing behind a tree for cover, and saw the townsfolk circled around the unfinished stage, holding candles. At the center stood a tall figure in a long coat, Mayor Jedediah Wright. His face was tilted toward the stars, eyes closed, lips moving in silent prayer. No one clapped, no one smiled. Caleb jotted down every detail, heart pounding. Something was wrong here, elegant wrong, like a ritual polished by centuries of repetition. Suddenly the candles extinguished in unison. Silence fell again, heavier than before. The crowd dispersed without a word. Caleb remained hidden, fingers still scribbling. Whatever this town was hiding, it began with that stage. Before Caleb steps any deeper into Ellenton, make sure you subscribe to our channel for more haunting stories like this. We uncover the truths that history tries to forget, and this one is only beginning. The next morning, Caleb awoke to the scent of cinnamon and burning sage drifting through the cracks in the floorboards. Downstairs, Miss Muir was arranging dried herbs into small bundles, her hands moving with ritualistic precision. She didn't speak, and Caleb didn't press her. Outside, the entire town buzzed with a strange choreographed energy. Men raised banners painted with curling flame patterns, and women placed black-veined flowers into wooden bowls set at every doorstep. Children, though few, were dressed in dark brown cloaks and led in small groups by elders who hummed that same eerie tune from the night before. By noon, the central square had transformed into a ceremonial arena. The stage Caleb had seen being constructed was now complete, a massive platform framed by arching iron rods, wound with withered vines, and crowned with a sun-shaped symbol made entirely of bone. Mayor Jedediah Wright stood beside it, adorned in a heavy coat embroidered with gold thread, his expression tight with obligation. His hands shook slightly as he addressed the gathering crowd. "People of Ellenton," he called out, voice brittle yet resolute, "on this, the eve of First Flame, we honor the pact and renew our devotion." The townsfolk responded in unison. "We carry the flame. We remember the silence." Caleb felt a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air. A long wooden torch was brought forward by two boys no older than 12. Mayor Wright accepted it with trembling fingers, then lowered it toward a small pile of dried cedar and sage stacked beneath the stage. As the fire sparked to life, the crowd burst into a slow, harmonic chant that vibrated through Caleb's chest like a living thing. There were no cheers, no dancing. The atmosphere was reverent, suffused with a heaviness Caleb couldn't define. He scanned the townspeople's faces. None of them seemed joyful. Most appeared grim. A few wept silently. As the flames rose higher, a bell rang from the old chapel at the edge of town, 9 solemn tolls that sent a flock of birds wheeling into the grey sky. Miss Muir appeared beside Caleb, offering him a small black-glazed cup. "Drink," she said softly, "to keep the veil thin." He hesitated. "What's in it? Juniper, wormwood, memory?" Caleb took a cautious sip. It was bitter with an aftertaste like burnt sugar. "The first flame," she explained, not meeting his gaze, "marks the beginning of remembrance. Our ancestors lost many things to winter, livestock, homes, loved ones. The flame keeps what's left." He swallowed hard. "And the mayor, what's his role?" Miss Muir's eyes clouded. "He is the keeper of the ember. Without him it dies." She walked away before he could ask more. The sun dipped behind the hills, casting the town in gold and violet. The torch remained burning at the base of the stage, a silent sentinel. Caleb noticed that no one approached the mayor. Children were kept at a distance. Even the elders, who had gathered in the shadows wearing black hoods, stood apart from him. He scribbled notes furiously. Every detail screamed of something older than Christianity, older than folklore. The symmetry, the silence, the way every motion was rehearsed but drained of joy. As the fire finally waned, the townspeople dispersed without a word. Mayor Wright remained on the stage, staring into the embers as if waiting for something, or someone to rise from them. Caleb lingered just long enough to see the mayor reach into his coat pocket and pull out a small object wrapped in cloth. He placed it gently on the ashes, bowed once and walked away, his shoulders sagging under invisible weight. Behind Caleb, the chapel bell rang once more, soft, slow, final. He turned around and the square was empty. And yet, he didn't feel alone. The morning after the first flame ceremony was eerily quiet. Caleb woke early, compelled by a sense of unrest that clung to his skin like damp mist. The streets of Ellenton were nearly empty. The usual movements of festival preparation had halted. Even the horses seemed subdued, their breath steaming in the cold air, eyes dull and distant. He decided to explore the cemetery. Located at the edge of town, behind the chapel, the graveyard sat on a gentle hill bordered by a rusted iron fence. Tall grass grew wild between the headstones, and moss blanketed many of the older markers. Some stones leaned as if bowing under unseen pressure. The silence was so complete, Caleb could hear his own heartbeat as he stepped past the gate. The first thing he noticed was the pattern. Rows and rows of headstones bore the same surname: Wright, Collins, Bell, Garrison. And all were engraved with the same date of death, October 30th, year after year, mayor after mayor. He knelt by one particularly tall headstone etched in elegant script. Mayor Abram Garrison, died October 30th, 1889. He bore the ember. Caleb's breath caught. He moved quickly from grave to grave, reading the inscriptions, confirming what his mind struggled to accept. Every mayor of Ellenton for over a century had died the night before the festival's final day. Not a single exception. Some died in their 30s, others in their 60s, but the date never changed. A crow landed on the nearest headstone and let out a harsh caw. Caleb flinched. Most of 'em burned, said a gravelly voice behind him. Caleb turned. An old man stood by the fence holding a rusted spade. His clothes were faded and patched, his hands thick with dirt. His eyes, however, were sharp as nails. "Are you the gravedigger?" Caleb asked cautiously. "Elias Crumb," the man replied. "Been digging here since I could hold a shovel." Caleb gestured toward the graves. "Why all the mayors? Why October 30th? Elias looked past him, as if seeing memories stitched into the wind. "It ain't the fire that kills 'em," he said quietly. "It's the waiting." Caleb frowned. "What do you mean?" Elias stepped forward, tapping the nearest headstone with his boot. Every one of them went hollow near the end. Some started muttering to themselves. Others just stared, like they was already gone. Caleb opened his notebook. "And no one ever questions this. Ellenton don't ask questions. We remember, that's enough." He paused, then added, "They get dreams, visions. Things calling from the woods, from the dirt. Last week before the flame, as they're not themselves anymore." Caleb's skin prickled. "What about the current mayor?" Elias squinted. "Jedediah. He's stronger than most, but the ember's been eating at him for weeks now. He just hides it better." "What's the ember?" Caleb pressed. Elias hesitated. "You'll see it soon enough. But let me tell you this. No mayor ever survives the torch." Then he turned and walked away, dragging the spade behind him. The sound scraped against stone like a warning. Left alone, Caleb wandered deeper into the cemetery. He found a circular patch of earth, completely bare. No grass, no stones. At the center, a single burned post jutted from the ground, scorched black, the top cracked like split bone. It wasn't a grave. It was a pyre. Wind rushed through the trees, stirring the dry leaves like restless whispers. Caleb stood motionless, trying to steady his breath. In that moment, Ellenton didn't feel like a town. It felt like a ritual that had been pretending to be one. He looked down at the post and noticed something carved faintly into the wood. Letters, half-burned, barely legible. "Keep the fire. Bury the man." He snapped his notebook shut. Something had been sacrificed here, again and again. And Caleb was beginning to wonder if he'd been brought not to witness but to replace. The Bell residence stood on the edge of Ellenton, its white paint peeling like sunburned skin, windows shuttered despite the bright afternoon light. Caleb hesitated at the gate. Martha Bell had not answered his letter requesting an interview, but Miss Muir had quietly suggested he try in person. "She remembers more than she wants to," the old woman had said. He knocked twice. After a long pause, the door creaked open a few inches. A pale eye peered through the gap. "I'm Caleb Thorne. I'm writing about the history of Ellenton, specifically the mayor's." A beat of silence. Then the door opened wider. Martha Bell stood before him in a grey shawl, her face worn but striking. The lines etched into her skin like riverbeds. She didn't smile, didn't welcome him in. But she stepped aside, and that was enough. The inside of her house smelled of lavender and something older, cedarwood maybe, or ash. On the mantel above a cold hearth sat a single photograph in a wooden frame, a man in ceremonial robes holding a torch. His smile was tense, his eyes shadowed. "My husband," she said softly. "Elliot Bell, Mayor, 1951. Caleb nodded. "I'm sorry for your loss." She looked at him, her gaze unreadable. They always say that, as if death was sudden, but in Ellenton it comes on slowly, like fog. He took out his notebook. "Would you be willing to tell me what happened? The records are incomplete. I'm trying to understand." She sat down in the chair opposite him, hands folded. "You don't understand Ellenton by reading about it. You feel it. You endure it." "I want to hear your version," Caleb insisted. Martha was silent for a long time. Then, in a hushed voice, she began, "Elliot started hearing things 2 weeks before the festival. Whispers, not in his ears, but in his bones. He said they came at night just before sleep, a voice calling his name from the trees. Always the same phrase, 'Keep the ember burning.'" She paused, eyes on the hearth. He thought it was stress, tradition weighing on him. But it got worse. He stopped eating, started writing down nonsense in the margins of his ledger, symbols, words in languages I didn't know, And he changed. Caleb leaned forward. How? He became distant, as if part of him had moved somewhere else. He wouldn't touch me, wouldn't sleep beside me. Sometimes he'd stand in the yard for hours, barefoot in the cold, staring into the woods. Martha's voice cracked. The night before the festival, he kissed my forehead and said, "If I run, they'll take you instead." Then he walked out the door. She pulled something from the pocket of her shawl, a small, folded note. Caleb took it gently. Inside, in shaky handwriting, it read, "Forgive me, I was born to burn." Caleb looked up. "Did he die in the fire?" She nodded. "They said it was an accident, that the stage caught flame, but no one screamed, no one ran to save him. They just watched." She stood and walked to the window, parting the curtains slightly. "This town doesn't bury its truth. It sets it ablaze and pretends nothing ever happened." Caleb stood. "Why do they keep doing it?" Martha turned to face him, eyes shining with fury and grief. "Because something's watching, something old, and the mayors are the payment." She walked to the door, opening it. "Go, Mr. Thorne, before you get too close to the ember." As he stepped outside, the wind shifted. Leaves spun in tight circles across the yard. He glanced back once, but she had already shut the door. The sun was beginning to dip again, casting long shadows across the cobblestone paths of Ellenton. And Caleb could no longer tell if what he felt in his chest was dread or the first flicker of smoke. The next time Caleb saw Mayor Jedediah Wright was at the bakery of all places. The mayor stood alone by the counter, untouched bread in hand, staring at the wall as if reading some message only he could see. His hair, once neatly combed, hung slightly askew. His coat was wrinkled, and though his mouth turned up in a polite smile when he saw Caleb, his eyes were those of a man fraying at the edges. "Mr. Thorne," he greeted with forced cheer. "Enjoying the festival so far?" Caleb returned the smile. "It's unlike anything I've ever seen." Jedediah nodded slowly. "Ellenton has its own rhythm. It runs on memory more than time." There was a pause. "I visited the cemetery yesterday," Caleb said carefully. "Spoke to Elias Crum and Martha Bell." Jedediah's face tensed, the smile faltering. "And what did the widow tell you?" "That Elliot heard voices, saw things before the end." The mayor's hand twitched slightly. He placed the bread down, untouched. "It's a heavy crown," he said at last. "Ours is not a ceremonial office. We carry more than policy." Caleb lowered his voice. "Are you hearing them too?" Jedediah met his gaze, and something cracked, just for a moment. Beneath the practiced expression, fear pulsed like a second heartbeat. "They come at night," he said, "sometimes in dreams, sometimes while I'm awake." Caleb's mouth went dry. "What do they say?" "Not words, not really. Just need, hunger, as if the woods themselves were breathing through me. I feel them behind my eyes when I close them." He ran a hand through his hair, visibly trembling now. "There are shadows in this town that never left, and every year they grow hungrier." The bell above the door jingled. An elderly woman entered, and Jedediah immediately straightened, adjusting his coat, plastering on his mayoral smile. He nodded respectfully, then turned back to Caleb. "Perhaps we'll speak again before the end," he said, voice clipped, retreating from vulnerability. Outside, the square was slowly filling with townspeople. Another day of festival preparations, though the atmosphere had shifted. There was tension now, a collective tightening of shoulders, forced laughter that faded too quickly. Caleb noticed how everyone gave Jedediah space. No one approached him, no one touched him. Children played, but never near him. He was isolated in plain sight. Later that afternoon, Caleb wandered near the woods just beyond the village boundary. As he paused at the tree line, he thought he saw movement between the trunks. Slender, quick shapes too tall for children, too fast for deer. Then he heard it, a whisper drifting on the wind. Faint, high, like a child singing off-key. He couldn't make out the words. He stepped back. From behind, Jedediah appeared, startling him. "You see them too now," the mayor said quietly. Caleb stared at him. "What are they?" Jedediah's face was pale, drawn. They used to be us, or something close, before the first flame, before the pact. He turned to face the trees as if expecting them to respond. The ash-faced children, he whispered. Children? Caleb echoed. That's what I call them. That's what they look like. Faces like scorched porcelain, eyes empty as if smoke lives behind them. Caleb felt a chill crawl up his spine. They don't hurt, Jedediah continued, almost wistfully. Not at first. They watch, they wait, and when the ember fades, they come for the bearer. He turned back to Caleb, a flicker of something desperate in his expression. I can't sleep, I barely eat. I feel myself thinning. You should leave, Caleb said. The mayor gave a hollow laugh. You think I haven't tried? He reached into his coat, pulling out a map, burnt at the corners, roads smudged, rivers misaligned. There's no way out of Ellenton, not when you've carried the ember. He folded the map and walked away. And though the sun still hung in the sky, the air around Caleb felt like dusk. The town hall loomed over the square like a mausoleum. Its tall wooden doors creaked on their hinges as Caleb slipped inside during the late afternoon lull. Miss Muir had said the records room was rarely locked. Ellenton didn't worry about outsiders. The real danger came from within. The air inside smelled of parchment dust and oil lamps. Long wooden shelves lined the archive chamber, filled with brittle folders, ledgers, and cloth-bound volumes dating back to the town's founding. Caleb moved with care, fingers trailing across spines marked with faded gold lettering. The official mayoral records rested in a locked cabinet near the back. But the lock was old and soft, and with a quick jab from a letter opener it clicked open. He began scanning names, years, causes of death. Each entry for October 30th was terse. Cardiac failure, accidental fire, undetermined. Everyone followed a festival. Deeper in the cabinet, Caleb found something stranger, a series of bound journals marked only with initials. The first was dated 1852. The handwriting was uneven, panicked. They chose me, the writer confessed. The fire speaks now, it shows me what the earth hides. Caleb flipped forward. Children of ash walk my halls. They press their faces to my windows, mouths full of soil. His hands trembled. These weren't administrative entries, these were confessions, testaments of fear, the mental unraveling of each mayor before death. In a folder labeled Ellenton Daily, 1890 to 1920, Caleb found clippings of articles written by a town editor long forgotten. Most were mundane, crop yields, births, marriages, but hidden among them were several issues with blacked-out sections. Names and headlines were slashed through with thick ink. Caleb held one to the light and read the faint ghost of a headline underneath. Mayor Garrison found burned in ritual stage fire. Town claims accident. Another read, Festival of the First Flame cancelled after death of... The rest was missing. He noticed that after 1920 the paper stopped printing names entirely in festival coverage. It became sterile, ceremonial. Caleb sat on the cold floor, surrounded by papers that reeked of lies buried beneath tradition. Each mayor had been chosen, each had been broken, and the town had erased the screams. He opened a small drawer labeled Obituaries. Inside were index cards, typed precise. He searched for Elliot Bell's. It read simply, Elliot James Bell, 39, passed peacefully at home. He served with honor. The town remembers. Peacefully. No mention of fire, no mention of sacrifice. Then at the bottom of the drawer, Caleb found a card not typed but handwritten. Its ink was red, the words shaky. There will be no end until the forest has its due. Each bearer of the ember gives more than flesh. They give memory, they give breath. He stared at the message, then at the wall behind the drawer. Something about it seemed uneven. He tapped gently. Hollow. Removing a stack of ledgers, he discovered a hidden panel. Inside was a small, locked box with a brass crest, the stag with the arrow. The same symbol that had sealed the letter calling him to Ellenton. There was no key nearby. He tucked the box into his satchel, heart pounding. Someone had gone to great lengths to hide this. Footsteps echoed above. Caleb froze. They were slow, deliberate, too rhythmic to be casual movement. He extinguished his lantern and crouched behind the cabinet. The door creaked open. A figure entered, tall, robed in black, face obscured. The silhouette moved to the center of the room, turned once as if sensing something, then stood motionless. Caleb didn't breathe. After several agonizing minutes, the figure turned and exited, footsteps fading. When Caleb finally stood, every part of him ached with tension. He knew now this wasn't just a tradition. It was a machine, and it had noticed him. The sky over Ellenton had taken on a strange pallor, more grey than blue, as if the town breathed through clouds rather than air. Caleb couldn't shake the feeling that something unseen now followed him, just beyond the periphery of his vision. He needed answers, ones that couldn't be found in ledgers or obituaries. The forest beyond Ellenton, forbidden to visitors, was his next destination. Locals always avoided the tree line. Even children who dared each other to run near it stopped short, retreating in pale silence. Martha's words echoed in his mind. Something's watching. Caleb waited until dusk began to settle. The streets grew quiet. Shadows stretched. Then, moving quickly, he crossed the field behind the chapel and ducked into the trees. The forest swallowed sound. No birds, no insects. Just the crunch of dried leaves beneath his boots and the distant crackle of wind brushing limbs overhead. The air here felt colder, thicker. He moved slowly, marking his path with broken twigs and occasional chalk marks on bark. 50 paces in, he saw the first totem. It hung from a branch by frayed twine, an object shaped from dried roots and animal bones, strung with hair. Human by the look of it. The eyes were hollow sockets carved into bark, the mouth sewn shut with black string. Beneath it lay a pile of ash, fresh. He continued. Soon there were more, bundles of feathers wrapped in skin, dolls made from scorched cloth, stones arranged in spirals that led off deeper into the woods. Every step forward felt like trespass. Every tree leaned slightly toward him, as if listening. Then he found the altar. It sat in a clearing, half swallowed by vines. A slab of dark stone cracked through the center, upon which were etched dozens of names, each scratched in haste, most unfinished. Caleb brushed away the leaves and saw the oldest name, Hiram Thorne, 1851. His breath caught. His own bloodline. His fingers trembled as he read on. Bell, Garrison, Wright, Collins, all the surnames of Ellenton's mayors. This wasn't just history. It was inheritance. Suddenly the wind stopped. Utter stillness, and then movement. Behind the altar, beyond the stone ring, a pale shape shifted between trees. Caleb ducked low, heart thudding. He reached for his satchel, pulling out the old brass crest box he had taken from the archive. As he held it, the air around him seemed to hum, low, like a whisper passed through roots. The shape came closer. A child. At least it appeared to be one. Its skin was ash-grey, its limbs too long. Its eyes were wide, dark, empty. Its mouth hung open slightly, revealing a blackened tongue. It stared at him, unblinking. Then another stepped out beside it. Then another. 3, 4, 5. They moved like smoke, slow, fluid, drifting closer without sound. Caleb stood frozen, not out of fear, out of understanding. These were the ash-faced children Jedediah had seen, the ones Martha's husband heard before his death. They weren't ghosts. They weren't alive. They were memory. Suddenly, a sharp crack split the silence. The children vanished, gone in a blink. Caleb turned and saw Elias Crumb standing at the edge of the clearing, rifle slung over his shoulder. "You're deep in it now," the old man said grimly. "I needed to know," Caleb whispered. Elias nodded. "Now you do." They walked back in silence. As they passed the totems again, Caleb realized they weren't warnings. They were invitations. Back at the edge of the woods, Elias finally spoke. "Next time you step in there, it might not let you leave." Caleb looked at him. "What are they?" Elias stared into the trees. "Det." He turned away and disappeared down the path. Caleb stayed a moment longer, staring into the darkness between the trees. And the trees, it seemed, stared back. Night in Ellenton came not like a curtain drawn, but like a lid closing over an eye. Caleb stayed awake in his room, the lamp dimmed low, heart still pounding from the memory of those pale figures in the woods. The brass crest box remained unopened on his desk. Whatever was inside it seemed to breathe with him now, silent, waiting. Miss Muir's words from earlier that day echoed, "If you must know the truth, follow the bell after midnight." So, just before 12, he slipped out. The town slept under a blanket of silence, save for a faint rhythmic toll, soft, distant, too slow to be the chapel's regular bell. Caleb followed it, winding through narrow alleys until he reached the path behind the schoolhouse that led toward the chapel's back entrance. The bell was louder now, pulsing like a heartbeat. The chapel loomed ahead, lights flickering through its stained glass windows. Caleb crouched beside a broken wall near the rear door and listened. Voices. Inside, dozens of them, chanting. He edged closer and peered through a crack. The pews were full, every seat taken by hooded figures dressed in black robes. At the front, Sister Evangeline stood tall in a flowing robe the color of ash, her silver hair unbound, arms raised. The language was unfamiliar, guttural and rhythmic, like the forest itself was speaking through them. Caleb couldn't make out the words, but he recognized the tone, devotion. This wasn't religion, it was ritual. Beside the altar, a young girl knelt, her head bowed. Evangeline placed her hand gently on the girl's crown, then lifted her eyes skyward and shouted a single phrase that echoed through the chapel like a thunderclap. The girl collapsed. Gasps rippled through the congregation, but no one moved to help. Evangeline continued speaking, her voice lower now, almost a lullaby. Then, from the shadows, the elders emerged. 6 in total, their faces masked, hands joined. They stepped in unison around the girl's body, forming a ring. The temperature around Caleb seemed to drop, though he hadn't even stepped inside. Evangeline knelt beside the girl and held something above her, an object glinting in the candlelight. Caleb squinted. A shard of blackened glass shaped like a flame. The chanting stopped. Complete silence fell. Then slowly the girl rose, her eyes fluttered open, and for one brief second they flashed silver. Caleb's breath caught. She stood and joined the circle. No one helped her. She moved as if carried by some invisible current. The elders stepped back into the shadows. The congregation rose in silent unison, bowed deeply, then filed out through the main doors. Caleb ducked into darkness, holding his breath as the robed figures passed. No one spoke. No one acknowledged him. Their faces remained hidden. They dispersed into the night like smoke. Once the last of them was gone, Caleb crept into the chapel. The altar still glowed with candlelight. He approached the girl who now sat in the front pew alone. She looked no older than 14. He spoke softly. "Are you all right?" She turned her head slowly. Her voice was distant, dreamlike. "He's coming soon." "Who is?" Caleb asked, her gaze unfocused. "The one who burns for us." Before he could ask more, Sister Evangeline stepped from the shadows. "You shouldn't be here," she said. Her tone was calm but firm. "I saw what happened," Caleb said, voice tight. "What are you doing to her?" Evangeline stepped forward, eyes unreadable. "She is being prepared, just as others were before her." "For what?" "To remember. The town must never forget. Each ember is passed with reverence." "You're using them," he snapped. "You're feeding something." Evangeline did not flinch. "We are keeping something asleep." She gestured toward the door. "Go, Mr. Thorne. You've already seen more than most do before the flame." Caleb hesitated. "She will not remember this in the morning," she added. He left, heart racing, pulse loud in his ears. But something inside him had already been lit. And it was growing. Caleb found Mayor Jedediah Wright sitting alone in the field behind the chapel, where the grass grew in strange patterns and no flowers ever bloomed. He looked smaller now, hunched forward with his elbows on his knees, staring at nothing. The weight on his shoulders was no longer figurative. It had carved into him, hollowed his frame. "I saw the sermon," Caleb said, stepping into the light. Jedediah didn't flinch. Of course you did. They're preparing children, conditioning them. You know this isn't a celebration. It's an offering. Jedediah gave a tired smile. Everything in Ellenton is an offering, even silence. Caleb sat beside him. Why don't you stop it? The mayor exhaled slowly. Because it would cost more than my life, and it would take the town with me. He reached into his coat, pulling out a silver pocket watch. He clicked it open and stared at the cracked glass. 4 days ago I woke to find my front door wide open. The ash-faced children were in my hallway. They didn't touch anything, just watched. Then they vanished. His voice was calm, but behind it trembled something raw. They show me things in dreams, forests burning, eyes made of stone, a mouth in the earth that speaks without sound. He turned to Caleb, face pale and sunken. I tried to leave. Took my car, followed the highway signs out of town, but the road folded in on itself, ended at the cemetery every time. They're not just hallucinations, Caleb said. They're binding you. Jedediah nodded. Each mayor before me tried something. One locked himself in the cellar, another walked into the river. The ember always finds you. It needs to be passed. Passed to who? To the town. Through me. He looked up, eyes hollow. And when I'm gone, the ember finds another. Caleb swallowed hard. What happens if you don't light the final flame? Jedediah laughed, bitter and sharp. Then Ellenton burns without guidance, and what sleeps beneath it wakes hungry. A breeze passed over the field, stirring the weeds into a quiet hush. Caleb leaned forward. Tell me everything. From the beginning. Jedediah's hands gripped the pocket watch tighter. It began in 1851. The crops failed, winter came early, and families began starving. The forest was thick then, wilder. The elders at the time, Thorne, Bell, Garrison, they entered the woods to seek guidance. Only one returned. Caleb's chest tightened. Hiram Thorne. Jedediah nodded. He came back changed. Said the forest had given them a gift, survival at a cost. And the cost was a life. Each year, one life to keep the town safe from what lies beneath the roots. But they were clever. They made it ceremonial. They chose the mayor, the one who swore to serve the people as the bearer. The ember was passed, the people stayed fed. The children were born healthy. The snow didn't fall too deep. Jedediah looked away. But over time the price grew steeper. The ember wants more. Not just blood. It feeds on memory, on fear. That's why the town forgets. It's easier to pretend. But not for you, Caleb said. No, he said, voice barely audible. Not for me. The pocket watch clicked shut. I have 3 days left. And I can already feel the fire in my bones. Caleb stood, unsure of what to say. The air between them was thick with dread and fatal acceptance. Jedediah didn't move. One more thing, he said suddenly. If the ember doesn't take me, it'll look elsewhere. He turned, meeting Caleb's eyes. You've seen too much already. That makes you a candidate. A long pause passed between them. Then Jedediah smiled, sadly, sincerely. Better I burn than the town. The brass crest box remained unopened on Caleb's desk for 3 days. He had tried twice, once with a knife, once with fire, but it resisted every intrusion. Until now. It opened with ease, as if it had simply waited for the right moment. Inside was a brittle scroll, yellowed with age and bound by a single black ribbon. Caleb unrolled it slowly. The ink had faded, but the handwriting remained elegant, deliberate. To he who seeks truth, know this, the pact was not forged in wisdom, but in desperation. It was signed, Hiram Thorne, October 31st, 1851. Caleb read every word. That winter came early. The harvest failed. My people begged me for food, for warmth, for mercy. I found none in God, none in men. But the forest answered. Hiram described a night alone in the woods, where he encountered a clearing that breathed heat even as snow fell around it. At the center stood a tree split by lightning, blackened but not dead. From within, it came a voice. I am the ember. I sleep beneath your roots. Feed me, and I shall feed you. Hiram had returned home in silence, marked. The next morning the forest offered a bounty. Wild game, thawed streams, unnatural warmth. No one questioned it. But the voice returned the next year. It demanded an offering. One soul to carry the flame. One to burn, so the rest may flourish. Hiram had chosen himself. I stepped into the pyre and felt no pain, only memory. The letter ended abruptly. The ink bled at the last lines. Caleb folded the scroll and stared at the wall. Hiram hadn't died in 1851. He'd become the ember's first vessel. The sacrifice had worked, but it had also awakened something too vast, too ancient to ever be satisfied again. Later that afternoon, Caleb brought the scroll to Martha Bell. She read it in silence, tears streaking her cheeks. "They never told us how it began," she whispered. "Just that it had to continue." Caleb's voice was steady. He didn't want to curse the town, he just wanted to save it. Martha nodded. But a sacrifice that repeats becomes a ritual, and a ritual, when left unchecked, becomes a prison. She stared out the window. That's what Ellenton is now, a prison pretending to be a village. The next person Caleb sought was Elias Crum. The gravedigger listened to the story in silence, then led Caleb to the oldest part of the cemetery, an area almost completely swallowed by undergrowth. There, behind a collapsed mausoleum, lay a single, unmarked stone. "This is where Hiram was buried after the first fire," Elias said, "or what was left of him." "No inscription. Wasn't allowed," Elias muttered. "The elders said names give power to memory, and memory calls things back." Caleb placed the scroll atop the stone. "Then maybe it's time someone remembered." Elias raised an eyebrow. "You mean to end it?" "I mean to try." Elias shook his head. "You're not from here. You don't know how deep it runs." Caleb met his eyes. "Maybe that's why I have a chance." That evening a storm rolled across the hills. The winds howled through the trees like voices in mourning. The townsfolk shuttered their homes. Even the chapel fell silent. But Caleb couldn't sleep. He kept seeing Hiram's words. "I felt no pain, only memory." What did that mean? Was the ember truly alive? Or was it simply the echo of trauma passed from one generation to the next? Either way, the fire demanded flesh, and the flame was coming due. The sky bled crimson as twilight sank into Ellenton. The town square, once filled with songs and rituals, now stood quiet, watching. Caleb had barely spoken all day. He wandered the streets, sensing that everything was holding its breath. At sundown, the bell tolled once, long and low. Jedediah Wright was gone. No one said it aloud. No official announcement was made. But every curtain in town was drawn, every porch light extinguished, and the final stage in the square had been completed. A wooden tower, blackened at its edges, waited for the ember. Caleb ran to the mayor's house. The front door was ajar. Inside, the air smelled like soot and dried roses. Jedediah's coat hung neatly on a hook. The fireplace had burned itself out. On the mayor's desk, Caleb found a sealed letter with his name on it. "Caleb," it read, "I chose this willingly. I always intended to. But not out of courage, out of obligation. They raised me to believe my blood was fuel. Maybe it still is. But you don't belong to this place, and that's what gives you power. If you ever get the chance to break this cycle, do it. Burn more than the stage. Burn the lie. At the bottom, tell them I walked into the fire." Caleb stepped outside just as the second bell rang. He followed the murmurs of people drifting toward the square, silent figures in dark clothes. No music, no torches. Just the faint scent of pine sap and old smoke. In the center of the stage stood Jedediah Wright. He wore the ceremonial robe, gold-trimmed, heavy, already stained with ash. His face was calm. He held no torch. Instead, Sister Evangeline stepped forward from the crowd, carrying a single flame cupped in a bronze vessel. The townspeople formed a ring, heads bowed. Children stood behind them, unmoving, eyes wide. Evangeline spoke, her voice loud and clear. "Let the ember take what is owed. Let the bearer of flame walk into remembrance. She offered the flame. Jedediah stepped forward, took the vessel, and climbed the wooden stairs of the pyre. No one stopped him. At the top he turned once, looked at the town, at the people, at the empty chapel. And then he dropped the flame. It caught instantly. The dry wood, soaked in old resins, erupted with fire. Caleb forced himself to watch, but Jedediah did not scream. He stood tall, motionless, even as the flames climbed his robe, devoured his limbs, curled around his face. Only when the fire touched his eyes did he finally close them. The bell tolled again, once, twice, 3 times. Caleb turned to see the townspeople raising their arms, palms open to the heat. A murmur passed through them, soft, almost like song. Then it stopped. The fire burned low, crackling, whispering. But something in the crowd shifted. People began to look around, confused. Children wept. A woman fainted. And Caleb realized the fire was not enough. Because Jedediah had not screamed. Because sacrifice must include pain. Because the ember had not been fed. From behind the chapel, a deep groan rose from the earth. A vibration passed through the stones. The sky turned darker, despite no clouds. The woods rustled. And from them, the ash-faced children emerged. They walked calmly into the square. Their mouths were closed. Their eyes were wide. And they moved toward the stage, toward the flames, toward the crowd. Panic broke. Screams rang out. People fled. But the children didn't follow. They stood, simply watching, as if waiting for someone else. Caleb backed away slowly. And as he turned, he saw it, carved in the charred beam of the stage, burned into the wood by fire not made by hands. One ember remains. And he knew exactly who they meant. The smoke hadn't cleared by dawn. It hung low over Ellenton like a veil, clinging to roofs curling beneath doorways. The pyre had collapsed into a smouldering ring of blackened timber, but no one dared touch it. The people stayed inside. The bell didn't ring. Caleb wandered alone through the square, his footsteps soft against ash. The town was silent, paralyzed. Something had gone wrong, and everyone knew it. No one spoke of Jedediah's death. No one spoke of the children. They had vanished into the woods at first light, leaving behind no footprints, no scent, only cold. At midday, Caleb returned to the chapel, seeking answers. Sister Evangeline stood before the altar, hands clasped, lips moving in prayer. She did not acknowledge him until he was close. It wasn't enough, he said. He chose it. He accepted it. But the fire didn't take him the way it should have. Evangeline's expression didn't change. The ember does not accept ease. It feeds on struggle. Sacrifice without resistance is an empty gesture. Caleb shook his head. You knew this would happen. She turned toward him. He was meant to scream. He was meant to fight. Instead, he surrendered. Her voice, normally calm, carried a hard edge. The pact must be honored. Caleb stepped back. You're going to choose another. Evangeline nodded. The ember is patient, but not infinite. It must feed. The ritual cannot remain broken. And you think I'll go along with this? Caleb asked, voice rising. It's not about willingness, she said softly. It's about suitability. And the ember has chosen. The heavy doors behind them opened with a groan. The elders entered. 6 figures cloaked in black, faces hidden, moving in perfect rhythm. They fanned out around Caleb, forming a half-circle. Evangeline turned to face them. The flame was not sated. The vessel was not accepted. The town remains under threat. The ember must pass. The elders raised their hands in unison. One by one they pointed at Caleb. He stared at them, unblinking. No, I'm not one of you. I don't belong to this town. Evangeline stepped forward. And that is why the ember recognizes you. You carry no inherited guilt. You carry no broken promises. You are unbound. That makes your offering pure. Caleb backed away. I'm not your sacrifice. A deep hum resonated through the chapel floor. It vibrated up through his legs into his spine. A low chant began behind the walls, voices rising, 100 at once. You can't do this, Caleb said, breath quickening. I was brought here to write a story, not to die for your sins. "The story brought you," she said. "The ember called, and you answered." The elders advanced. Caleb turned and ran. He burst through the chapel doors into daylight, heart racing. But something was wrong. The streets looked unfamiliar. The building stretched too tall, twisted in angles that hadn't existed the day before. Doors disappeared when he looked at them. Windows blinked shut. He ran to the edge of town. The road out was gone. In its place stood forest, tall, suffocating, endless. The same woods he'd entered days ago now wrapped around Ellenton like a trap. He turned, panting. The elders stood behind him. So did Evangeline. She held something in her hand, the brass crest box. Open now. Inside, the black shard, the ember. She stepped forward. "You are the last name on the stone." He shook his head. "No. No, you can't." She pressed the shard into his chest. It didn't burn, it melted into him. He collapsed. As the world blurred around him, he heard her final whisper, "You are the ember now." Caleb awoke in darkness. Not night, darkness. The kind that pressed against his eyes even when they were wide open. His limbs felt heavy, as if wrapped in damp cloth. He couldn't tell if he was standing, sitting, or floating. There was no floor beneath him, no ceiling above. Only the ember burning silently in his chest. It pulsed, not painfully but insistently, a rhythm not his own. Then a whisper. "Remember." He opened his eyes, truly opened them, and found himself in the mayor's house. But it was different now. The walls bled shadow, the furniture rotted in place. Flames flickered along the floorboards without consuming them. He tried to stand, but his legs refused. The mirror across the room showed not his reflection, but a flickering silhouette, him and not him. His eyes glowed amber, his skin cracked with light beneath the surface. The ember was reshaping him. He staggered to the window. Outside, the town was still. The people walked, but they were faceless. The buildings breathed. The sky rippled like oil. Ellenton had become memory. A prison built from ritual. He turned and found a figure sitting in the corner chair. Elias Crumb, but older, ashen, hollow-eyed. "I told you," Elias rasped. "The forest always collects its debt." Caleb tried to speak, but no sound came. Elias leaned forward. "You've been chosen, boy, just like Jedediah, just like Elliot Bell. But you're different." He pointed a cracked finger. "You didn't grow here. You don't owe this place your silence." Then Elias was gone. In his place stood Hiram Thorne, or what was left of him. His face was half burned, but his eyes were human. Sad. "I thought I could save them," Hiram said. "1 year. 1 life. But the ember doesn't know mercy. It only remembers the offering." He reached out a skeletal hand and touched Caleb's chest. "You must unlearn the fire." The house cracked. The walls shook. Voices rose in the distance, chanting. The elders, the townspeople, calling for the final flame. Caleb fell to his knees, gasping. He saw faces. Evangeline, Martha, the girl from the chapel, all of them watching him. Then he saw something deeper. A shape beneath the town. Not a god, not a demon, a hunger, old and dreaming. It slept below the roots, below the blood, and the ember was its breath. Suddenly the room exploded in light. Caleb stood in the middle of the town square, surrounded by fire. The people circled him, eyes empty, mouths chanting. He wasn't burning, but everything else was. Buildings collapsed in flame, trees ignited from within, the sky split into molten clouds. And still the ember in his chest pulsed. Then one voice pierced the chaos. "Martha." "Fight it, Caleb." He looked toward her. She was outside the circle, eyes full of fury and grief. "You're not theirs." The ember flared. Caleb screamed, and in that scream came everything the fire had taken. Jedediah's silence, Hiram's hope, Elliot's terror, the children's lost names, the ashes buried without truth. He screamed it all back into the world, and the ember cracked. Light erupted from his chest, shattering the circle, throwing the elders to the ground. The sky turned black. Then Stillness. Caleb collapsed. He was alone again. But not burning. Not yet. Caleb lay motionless beneath the broken sky. Smoke drifted above him, curling into shapes he didn't recognize, faces, mouths, prayers half-formed. The ember inside him flickered like a dying lantern. He was no longer in the town he had arrived in. Ellenton had unraveled. Around him, ruins. The square was a charred circle, the chapel cracked down the steeple. The elders had scattered, but their presence lingered like breath on glass. He forced himself to stand. His limbs obeyed, barely. The ember had weakened, or perhaps he had weakened it. "Martha," he whispered. Somewhere in the distance, a bell rang once. He followed the sound. Through collapsed alleys and smoke-thick air, he found her near the edge of the woods, kneeling beside something half-buried in ash, a book, his journal, still intact. She looked up. "You're still alive." "Barely," he said. She handed him the journal. "You cracked the ember." "I've never seen that happen." Caleb opened the cover. His notes were still there, Elias, Hiram, the rituals, the names. He'd written everything, preserved it. "Martha, we have to destroy it, all of it. The stage, the altar, the ember." She nodded. "I've been waiting years to hear someone say that." Together they walked toward the elder hall, the place where it all began. The building pulsed with a faint, unnatural glow. Roots crawled up its sides, feeding off the air. Inside, silence. They stepped across the threshold. The air thickened. At the center of the hall sat the altar, a twisted mass of stone, bone, and scorched wood. The brass crest box rested atop it, closed again, though neither of them had touched it. "It resets," Martha said. "Always resets." Caleb stepped forward, removed the box, and dropped it to the floor. Then, from the shadows, voices. The elders. They emerged from the walls, cloaked in black, masks cracked by flame, but eyes full of fury. "You carry the ember," one hissed. "You must feed it," said another. Caleb backed toward Martha. "No more," he said. "No more mayors, no more pacts." "I choose to burn it all." "You will burn regardless," the elders said together. They advanced. Martha pulled a flask from her coat, filled with oil. She doused the altar. Caleb struck a match from the remnants of a hymn book. The flame caught instantly. The elders shrieked, their robes igniting without touch. The room trembled, roots tore from the floor, lashing at the walls. The ember within Caleb screamed, but it didn't command. It begged. "Let go," Martha shouted. Caleb did. He cast the ember onto the flame. The world shook. The altar exploded in light. The roots convulsed. The elders collapsed, one by one, turning to ash. And then came silence. The building began to crumble. Martha grabbed Caleb's arm. "Run!" They burst through the doorway as the elder hall collapsed behind them, stone and fire swallowing the last piece of Ellenton's secret. Outside, the air had changed. The fog lifted. The sky returned to blue. The forest stood still, watching, yes, but no longer breathing down their necks. Caleb turned in a slow circle. The roads were visible again, the paths no longer twisted. The town was still standing, but its heart had been gutted, and for the first time in generations there was no ember. It took 3 days for the fires to die completely. The town did not speak of what had happened. Some tried to rebuild, others packed bags and left, never once looking back. No one mentioned the elders. Their names faded like breath in winter. Caleb remained. He wandered the remnants of Ellenton as both witness and survivor. The chapel doors hung open, wind whistling through its hollow frame. The mayor's house was silent. The square had no stage. Where there was once ritual, there was now only aftermath. Martha stayed as well, helping the few who dared remain. She never again mentioned the ember or the children or the woods. Some things, she believed, had to rot in silence. On the morning of the 7th day, Caleb stood at the edge of town, looking down the road that now truly led away. His bag was light, only a notebook, the clothes on his back, and one final letter tucked into his coat pocket. It had been waiting at his door. "You broke the circle, but some circles do not end. They turn slower, sleep deeper." We thank you, but Ellenton will remember, and so will you. No signature. He turned and walked. Hours later, a car passed him near the state line. A farmer from Waynesburg offered him a ride. He accepted. When asked where he'd come from, Caleb paused. "Just a town I was passing through," he said. The farmer nodded. "There ain't many of those left." In Pittsburgh, Caleb checked into a small boarding house under a false name. He spent days sleeping, waking from dreams filled with smoke and voices chanting in languages he didn't know. One night, he awoke outside, barefoot, no memory of how he'd gotten there. Ash on his hands. He moved to another town, then another. But the ember had marked him. Not as a vessel, but as a witness. He began writing. He didn't name Ellenton, didn't list dates or exact people, but the story poured out of him, page after page, night after night. He filled notebooks, burned some, kept others locked away. And still, the whispers came. Sometimes in dreams, sometimes just before the sun rose. Once, in a mirror. The words were always the same. Keep the fire. Bury the man. He understood now. Ellenton had never needed a mayor. It needed memory. It needed someone to carry the weight of its history, not to burn, but to preserve. He had broken the ritual, but the story remained, and as long as it was remembered, the ember would not rise again. One day, perhaps, someone else would find the town, dig too deep, ask the wrong questions, enter the woods. But Caleb knew they'd have to face the truth he'd written, or start the fire anew. Until then he waited, he listened, he remembered. Because some stories don't end, they just smolder. If this story chilled you, don't forget to subscribe, and click the video on your screen to uncover more untold horrors from America's haunted past.